first thing that we just need to talk about is that there was a formula that was put into the statute. I believe it was in 2014. Before that, there was no formula. The courts considered, what does this person need? Does this person need maintenance at all? There was something called a threshold test that people had to meet before maintenance was even discussed. And it was very much a consideration of the totality of the circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
The formula was enacted in 2014. And in essence, what the formula provided was that the court would take 40% of the higher of the total income, okay, and then subtract the income that was earned by the lower earner. So in other words, if the total income was 100,000 and the lower earner was earning 20,000, they would subtract that. Okay, so that the lower earner would have a total of 40,000, which would include that 20,000. So in that scenario, the higher earner would pay 20,000 to make it a 40,000 a year salary for the lower earner and a $60,000 a year salary for the higher earner. The formula was predicated on the concept that existed for as long as you and I have been practicing law, and really as long as even the people who founded my firm have been practicing law. So over 50 years. And that premise was that the higher earner was able to deduct maintenance. So in other words, if he or she were paying the $60,000, he was able to discuss, well, in this case, $20,000, excuse me, to stick with the same example, but if they were paying $20,000, they would deduct that right off the top of their income taxes. So that instead of showing an income of $100,000 on their tax return, they'd show an income of $80,000. And that was a great way to sell maintenance, in the old days, because it wasn't as bad. But now what happened was that the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act changed the taxability of maintenance from being tax deductible to the higher earner. And now it is not tax deductible to the higher earner. So in other words, that higher earner has to pay taxes, and then any maintenance payment comes out of their net. And that's a hard issue. And so when that happened, I was the chair of the family law section for the Colorado State Bar Association. And we were obviously all just like, what are we going to do right now? Because the whole statute, the whole formula was premised on the idea that the maintenance was deductible. So the first thing we did was at the next executive council meeting, we meet once a month, we took a poll as to whether we should keep the formula at all. And I thought that the results of that poll were interesting, because when the formula was first being considered, first being discussed, people didn't really like it. But at this meeting, everyone except one person believed that the formula was helpful, believed that it helped settle cases, and believed that we should continue with a formula. So that's the first decision that we had to make. Then the next decision is, okay, well, should we then change the formula in response to this change in the tax code? And again, with the exception of one person, we all decided, yes, we're going to change the formula. Well, I believe that was probably the third Friday in January or the third Friday in February. I don't remember which one it was, but whichever one it was, there were only 6 weeks until the end of the legislative session. So it must have been February. And what happens is when you're trying to pass new legislation, you have to first decide what you want to have as your new statute, what modifications you want to make to an existing statute. And then you have to find someone, a legislator, to sponsor that. Mm-hmm. And then you have to develop the recommendations for that, for the sponsor. And then you have to argue at the legislature to get the new legislation passed. You have to have the family law section approve it. You have to have the overall Colorado Bar Association approve it. So this is typically not a process that happens in 6 weeks. This is typically a process that happens. We start in September, and then, the former head of the legislation was Mary Moses, and she would always have new bills for us. Now it's, I believe Chris Radiff is one of the chairs, and there's always new bills going, and they're just discussed at every meeting, and the changes are discussed at every meeting over the course of the year. That wasn't going to happen here. So we formed a committee, and the committee asked several local accountants to help us, and several local accountants to analyze how the impact of this would or should affect the formula. And we ended up with a chart developed by Eric Six. And that chart, I'm going to just call it the split the pain chart. Yeah. And so what he determined is that, everyone's going to suffer, right? Because by shifting this tax burden from the lower earner to the higher earner, you've reduced your net sum. Okay. Right. So everyone's going to suffer. So what the magical chart did was it decided where are the cutoff points where people will suffer equally. And, they kind of decided, and Eric decided, and then other people weighed in and agreed that the first set of adjustments needed to be made for people who earned under 10,000. And if we applied one adjustment to that group of people, it would help share the pain.
And the idea, Robin, was, and just for people that to kind of understand, my recollection, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that the deductibility of maintenance, that it was a last minute, it was kind of at the end that they pulled that because what ultimately happens, you and I both know, it was one of the last win-wins in a divorce. I used to explain to people where if, for example, we have a hypothetical divorce scenario, Eric and Melanie Wolf. If Eric is going to be paying Melanie $10,000 a month and he can deduct that, then Melanie, if she's in a lower tax bracket, she gets more after taxes because it's taxable to her. And essentially, who subsidizes that difference is the US government, the IRS, because we were playing tax arbitrage. And so you and I would explain to clients, hey, we can try to get as much maintenance instead of child support, or there's really a win-win. And when you were saying that there's this lose-lose or feeling the pain, it was because that subsidy by the government was no longer available. And so what at least the step-ups and the threshold issues that you guys addressed was that there's different tax consequences at different income levels. So if there is less money, then the taxes are not, the impact is not as great. Is that generally accurate?
Yes, that's generally accurate. And yes.